The bolt cutters flashed once in the security camera. Then my generator panel swung open. At 4:17 in the morning, someone was stealing electricity from my house. They thought the old man on the corner wouldn't notice. They were wrong, because the panel they broke into didn't just power my home. It carried my name, license number, and 34 years of electrical grid experience stamped directly on the control plate. And the woman behind it. She was the president of our HOA. 3 days later, she would be sitting across from a county prosecutor, explaining why she authorized someone to break into my electrical system. But at 4:17 a.m., she still believed she was the smartest person in the neighborhood. My name is Marlon Dreiss. I'm 71 years old. Retired electrical grid engineer. 34 years maintaining power systems across northern Georgia. Hospitals, water plants, emergency response centers. Infrastructure where mistakes don't just cost money. They cost lives. So when someone tampers with electrical equipment on my property, I don't panic. I document, I analyze, and I wait. The neighborhood where this happened is Cedarbrook Crossing, a quiet HOA community outside Alpharetta. 182 homes. Neatly trimmed lawns. Mailbox posts painted exactly the same shade of brown. Rules for everything. And for the first 9 years I lived there, those rules were manageable. Annoying sometimes, but manageable. Then Karen Olwell became HOA president. Karen didn't just enforce rules. She weaponized them. Fines appeared for trivial things. Garden hoses, trash bins, mailbox angles. Most residents paid quietly. Arguing with an HOA board usually costs more than the fine. Karen understood that. What she didn't understand was systems. And she definitely didn't understand electrical engineers who spent decades documenting everything. Because when she ordered someone to break into my generator panel that morning, she didn't realize she was walking straight into the kind of mistake that ends careers, reputations, and sometimes court cases. And by the end of that week, the woman who loved enforcing rules was learning what happens when the law starts enforcing her. Karen Olwell had only been HOA president for 3 years. But in that time, she had managed to transform Cedarbrook Crossing into something very different from the quiet neighborhood it once was. Before Karen, the board mostly handled routine things. Landscaping contracts, maintenance of the pool, occasional disputes about fences or paint colors. After Karen took office, the atmosphere changed. Suddenly, there were community compliance inspections, unscheduled walkthroughs where board representatives documented minor violations, trash cans left out too long, outdoor furniture that didn't match HOA guidelines, mailboxes not aligned perfectly. The fines weren't huge, usually $50, sometimes $100, but they appeared constantly. And Karen delivered them with the confidence of someone who believed authority alone made her correct. Most people simply paid. It wasn't worth the argument. I had paid too myself over the years. Once for leaving my trash bin visible for less than an hour. Once for a garden hose placed on the wrong side of the driveway. I disagreed with both, but they were small enough that fighting them felt pointless. The generator was different. I installed it in 2019 after a severe storm knocked out power across Alpharetta for nearly a week. 6 days without electricity during a Georgia summer isn't just inconvenient. For elderly residents, it can become dangerous very quickly. I also run medical equipment overnight that requires reliable power. So I installed a 22-kilowatt natural gas standby generator connected to my home through a professionally permitted transfer system. Every component had been inspected by Fulton County. Every safety requirement followed. But the most important feature was the isolation panel mounted beside my garage. That panel prevented electricity from feeding back into the public grid. Backfeed is one of the most dangerous mistakes in electrical systems. If a generator sends current into a line utility workers believe is dead, someone dies. I had spent decades preventing that exact situation, which meant my installation wasn't just permitted. It was engineered carefully. Karen first noticed the generator during one of her compliance inspections. She showed up one Thursday morning wearing a burgundy blazer and holding a clipboard. Behind her stood a man I didn't recognize. "Your generator enclosure violates HOA structure guidelines," she said without greeting. "It exceeds the permitted dimensions." I asked her which guideline she meant. She flipped through papers dramatically before reading a line about accessory structures larger than 8 feet. I explained calmly that a generator mounted on a concrete equipment pad was not legally defined as a structure. The Fulton County permit clearly said so. Karen wrote something on her clipboard. "The board's determination is final," she replied. Then she left. 3 days later, a letter arrived. $150 fine. Another $150 for every day the generator remained. At that point, I did what I always do when dealing with systems. I started documentation. I contacted Fulton County's Building and Inspections Department and requested a formal determination. 11 days later, they responded. The letter was simple. A generator installation on a concrete equipment pad does not qualify as an accessory structure under county code. I mailed the letter to the HOA. Certified delivery, requesting that the fine be removed. Karen's response came quickly. But it wasn't an apology. It was escalation. The new letter claimed my generator presented a potential electrical hazard to neighboring properties. The board now demanded I disconnect it until their own inspector evaluated the system. That was when I called an attorney. Her name was Priya Anand, a local real estate and HOA law specialist. I sent her every document. The permit, the county letter, the HOA notices. The next morning, she called. "They cannot touch that generator," she said immediately. "Not legally." "And if they try?" I asked. "That becomes criminal trespass," she replied. "And possibly theft if they interfere with your equipment." That conversation ended with one piece of advice. Document everything. So that afternoon, I installed a motion-activated security camera aimed directly at the generator panel. I didn't know yet how important that camera would become. But 3 weeks later, at exactly 4:17 a.m., my phone vibrated with a motion alert. I watched the footage twice before the sun came up. The person approached my generator panel wearing dark clothing. They carried a tool bag and bolt cutters. The lock broke in seconds. Then the panel opened. A thick cable was attached to the secondary output terminal, one I had installed for emergency use. The cable ran along the fence line and disappeared through a gap into the neighboring yard. The entire operation took less than 12 minutes. When it ended, the panel door closed loosely. The thief walked away. Anyone else might have called police immediately. I didn't, because I needed to understand the situation completely before making a move. Electrical systems are like puzzles. You never react based on partial information. You gather the entire picture. Then you act once. Precisely. At 7:00 a.m., I called Priya. She listened carefully as I described what I saw. Then she said three things very clearly. Do not touch the cable. Do not confront anyone. And call Fulton County Code Enforcement immediately. Within hours, she had filed an emergency legal motion to prevent any further tampering with my equipment. Meanwhile, I checked the HOA directory. The property on the north side of my fence belonged to Stephen Olwell, Karen's husband. The cable from my generator ran directly into their yard, which meant the HOA president, accusing my equipment of being unsafe, had just authorized someone to break into it. But the real shock came next. The neighborhood power grid was fully operational. There was no outage, no emergency. Every house already had electricity, which meant the only purpose of that cable was to steal power from my generator. Still, the situation felt surreal. Karen controlled the HOA. She had influence over the board. Most neighbors avoided conflict with her entirely. For a moment, I wondered if this would somehow be twisted against me. After all, powerful people sometimes find ways to shift blame. By Thursday morning, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived. They reviewed the camera footage, photographed the broken lock, documented the cable running through the fence. Then they walked next door. I didn't hear what was said. But 2 hours later, the cable disappeared. Someone pulled it back through the fence, trying to erase the evidence. Unfortunately for them, the deputies had already photographed everything. The following week, tension spread through the neighborhood. Rumors moved quickly. Board members suddenly claimed they knew nothing about Karen's actions. An emergency HOA meeting was scheduled. Residents filled the clubhouse. Karen arrived wearing a black blazer. Confident, composed. She spoke for nearly 10 minutes about a misunderstanding involving a contractor hired to evaluate emergency preparedness. According to her story, the contractor had acted alone, unauthorized, an unfortunate mistake. Some residents seemed ready to accept the explanation. For a moment, it looked like she might escape the consequences entirely. Then Priya stood up and asked one question. If this was an emergency preparedness inspection, she said calmly, why did the cable from Mr. Dryce's generator run specifically into your home? The room fell silent. Karen tried to answer, but the explanation came out fragmented, unconvincing. Even the other board members looked uneasy. For the first time since the situation began, Karen looked nervous, but the worst consequences hadn't even started yet, because the sheriff's office was still investigating, and the contractor she hired had already started talking. 11 days after the sheriff's deputies first visited my property, the situation changed completely. Up until that point, Karen had been relying on one thing: control. Control of the HOA. Control of the narrative. Control of how the story looked inside the neighborhood. But once law enforcement stepped in, control moved somewhere else entirely. And Karen was no longer the person holding it. The investigation moved faster than most residents expected, because the evidence was unusually clean. There was security footage showing the panel being forced open, There were photographs of the cable running from my generator through the fence. There was documentation proving the equipment belonged entirely to me. And most importantly, there was the man who actually carried out the job. His name was Royce Pittman, a handyman who had previously done small maintenance projects for the HOA. Painting, fence repairs, odd jobs around the clubhouse. When investigators spoke to him, Royce realized very quickly how serious the situation was. Tampering with electrical systems is not treated lightly, especially when it involves equipment connected to residential infrastructure. So Royce made a decision. He cooperated completely. His statement explained everything. Karen had approached him directly. She told him the generator installation on my property violated HOA rules. She claimed she needed proof that it was unsafe. According to Royce, Karen gave him 2 instructions. Cut the lock. Run a cable from the panel to her house. Then she could demonstrate that the generator posed electrical risks. The plan made no technical sense. But Royce wasn't an engineer. He simply followed instructions. And he admitted that Karen had handed him the bolt cutters personally. Once his statement entered the investigation file, the situation changed overnight. Because now the case wasn't just about stolen electricity. It was about deliberate authorization. 11 days after the sheriff's visit, formal charges were filed. Karen Olwell was charged with criminal trespass, theft of services, criminal damage to property. The contractor faced charges as well, but agreed to cooperate with prosecutors in exchange for a plea arrangement. The news spread through Cedarbrook Crossing faster than anything I had seen in 9 years living there. Within days, the HOA board scheduled another emergency meeting. This time, it was not Karen calling it. It was the other 4 board members. Residents filled the clubhouse again. Karen sat at the front of the room. Same chair, same authority she had used for years. But the atmosphere had changed completely. One by one, the other board members spoke. They explained they had never approved any action involving my generator. They had not authorized any contractor work. They had not even been informed about the plan. Then a motion was introduced. Remove Karen from the position of HOA president immediately. The vote was simple. 4 hands raised. Karen did not vote. For the first time since she moved into Cedarbrook Crossing, Karen Olwell had no authority in the neighborhood at all. A new interim president, Douglas Finn, called me the following morning. He apologized on behalf of the association. Then he asked what steps the HOA could take to repair the situation. My answer had 3 conditions. First, every fine placed on my property under Karen's orders would be formally removed. Second, the HOA would commission a legal review of every enforcement action taken during her presidency. Third, the governing documents would be amended so no board member could issue compliance penalties involving technical systems without consulting licensed professionals. Douglas agreed. Within weeks, the changes were underway. But Karen's personal situation was only beginning. Because criminal court moves slower than HOA meetings. And her case would take 8 months to reach its conclusion. Karen Olwell initially pleaded not guilty. That's fairly common in cases like this. But as the evidence continued to build, the situation became difficult to contest. The security footage was clear. Royce Pittman's cooperation statement was detailed. The sheriff's photographs documented the cable connection. And the HOA board had already removed Karen from office. 4 months later, her legal strategy changed. Her attorney negotiated a plea agreement with prosecutors. Karen pleaded guilty to theft of services and criminal damage to property. The trespass charge was dismissed as part of the deal. Her sentence included 18 months of probation, full restitution for damages, payment of my legal fees, and 80 hours of community service. Royce received probation as well for his role in the incident. The civil case moved separately. My attorney had filed a lawsuit against both Karen personally and the HOA organization. The matter never reached trial. Karen's homeowner's insurance negotiated a settlement covering legal costs, security upgrades, and other documented expenses connected to the incident. The HOA's insurance provider contributed additional funds related to internal review and policy changes. I could have pursued larger damages. Legally, the option existed. But that was never my goal. From the beginning, I wanted only 3 things. My property left alone, the official record corrected, and the people responsible held accountable. Eventually, the legal process delivered exactly that. 14 months after her sentencing, Karen moved out of Cedarbrook Crossing. The house sold quickly. A new family moved in. They have a dog that barks occasionally in the evenings, and a child who rides a bicycle along the sidewalk on weekends. Normal neighborhood things. My generator is still in the same place beside my garage. Same concrete pad. Same isolation panel. Same license number on the documentation. The only difference is the lock. The new one is hardened steel. Much harder to cut. Not because I expect another incident, but because 34 years working in infrastructure taught me one rule that applies everywhere. When a system fails, you fix the vulnerability. Then you move forward. And I did. But I've always wondered something. Karen believed HOA authority meant she could push anyone around. Even someone whose entire career involved understanding systems and consequences. So here's the question I'll leave you with. If someone in your neighborhood tried using HOA power to bully or intimidate you, would you ignore it? Or would you document everything and make sure the system eventually worked exactly the way it was supposed to? Let me know in the comments.